Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Gigi Howard. I'm a librarian, and I'm also the host of Drinks in the Library, where every episode I interview a guest about their favorite book and we pair it with a drink. I'm so excited to be here tonight with you and with my friends, EveryLibrary, the only national political action committee for libraries. And this Wednesday night, we are in the midst of National Library Week, a week we celebrate all things library, public, school, academic, special, and really our staff, our buildings, all of the wonderful things that we bring to our communities. Now, in the past few years, we've seen a tremendous uptick in book banning and attempted book banning across the country, which we know is ultimately attack on our freedom to read. And now it is more important for us to come together, those of us that love libraries, our authors, our readers, librarians and library supporters to stand against book bans and censorship. So I couldn't be more pleased to be here with you tonight, talking with our panel to celebrate, to learn, and hear about their latest novels. And I'm joined today by M.T. Anderson, author of Nicked, which is due out in July. MT Anderson has written stories for adults, picture books for children, adventure novels for young readers, graphic novels of ancient French tales, and several books for older readers, both teens and adults. And his satirical book, Feed, was a finalist for the National Book Award and was a winner of the LA Times Book Prize. Also here with us tonight is Scott Guild. Scott. He is the author of Plastic. It's his debut novel, which just came out in February, and he has his MFA and PhD in English. He is currently an assistant professor at Marian University in Indianapolis, where he teaches literature and creative writing. And before his degree, Scott was a musician with the new wave band New Collisions, which toured with the B-52s and opened for Blondie. All right, so a common theme that both of these books have is that they are tellers of our shared humanity at our most essential form. They do so in wildly, almost contrasting ways. Plastic is set in a dystopian future that one can imagine being a few decades, 50, 60 years from now, except that all the characters are plastic Barbie like figurines, while Nicked is set almost 1,000 years ago in Italy in the midst of a plague and is based upon actual events in which a monk joins a heist to capture the bones of St. Nicholas, Santa Claus, um, which were believed to have healing powers. So let me turn it first to MT. Here's a quote from editor Zach Phillips. Nick bamboozles easy categorization. It's set in medieval times, yet it oozes a cleverness that feels slick and modern. It's as strange as any fable you've ever read, yet it sticks remarkably close to true historical accounts. It's deeply irreverent, at times downright sacrilegious. It's a caper, yet it hinges on one man's great leap of faith into the unknown. So, MT, in my podcast, the first question I always ask is, who were you when you read this book? So let's flip that a little bit. And I want to ask you, who were you when you wrote this book? What was your motivation around writing it?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'd always been interested in all of the weird stories behind Saint Nicholas, Santa Claus, because we think we know him from the 19th century legends, but they're nothing like what people believed for most of human history. They thought that he was like a guy who flew around, literally flew by himself, saving sailors, fighting demons. He defeated a serial killer who'd killed 3 kids. He gave packets of gold to these 3 daughters to stop them from being sold into prostitution, which is the reason that he's associated with gift giving. And then I heard this story that honestly, these 2 Italian cities had raced to steal his corpse and take it back to Italy, where they were then, because it was supposed to ooze an oil that would heal anything. So this story was, as you can imagine, I was just like, this is so bizarre. I would love to kind of think about this as a heist novel. So yeah, and I, oddly enough, I've actually done also dystopian things set in the future, like Feed, which you mentioned, is set in the future, or Landscape with Invisible Hand, which became a movie last year, was something set in the future. So I had done sort of this future stuff, and now I was like, no, I want to do something that's every bit as strange and alien, but part of history. So that was sort of my idea behind this.
And did you do a lot of like delving into the past and seeing when you were doing your research?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, I did a huge amount. I ended up actually commissioning translations of these narratives about this that are really kind of extraordinary, that no one had ever translated before. And so, in fact, I'm going to do a follow-up thing that's a nonfiction piece about what like absolutely really happened. Because, secretly I kind of Hollywoodized the plot a little bit to make it even more, like swashbuckling, rom-com, So like I wanted to really make it into like a full medieval caper novel. So there are some things that I changed. So I'm going to actually do a nonfiction piece that's just going to be like, here is the actually bizarre story of what really did go down that weird like April morning when they stole the body of Santa Claus.
It's quite a story. And also, what is the story about? Like, who are characters? Can you give us a little gist about that?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, the main two characters are a monk who has been, who wants to get the bones for his city, and then his city has hired a relic hunter. So this was a legitimate profession in the Middle Ages. Like you would, you would hire people who would go find the relics you wanted, and they would, legally or illegally get them for you. So like it's this super shifty guy who gets relics. It's this monk, and there's this kind of like sort of attraction between them, but also they are also, they're trying to, in a sense, like betray each other all the time. Like they want opposite things or connected but opposite things. So it's kind of like there's a little like noir feel to that too.
Okay, excellent. And then like, so when we talk about the characters, we talk about their stories, what do you want your readers to take away from this story?
Just a sense of like the strangeness and miraculousness and joy in life, really. Like we live in a strange world, and we need to remember that. We get so caught up in driving to work and stopping to get something to eat on the way home that we forget how strange and beautiful the world is. So I mean, really what I want to try to get at is this kind of miraculous, almost like almost religious sense, even though the book is not, oddly enough, is sort of agnostic in terms of, do saints' bones help anyone? But nonetheless, there's this sense of like just the awe that you approach the world with, and it's strange stories of people falling in love and fighting and saving saints' bones.
Yeah. And I mean, also like the revisiting of the past with the story. I was really taken with when they got on the ship and they all had to sleep near each other, and just thinking about how gross and icky that must have been in the middle of a plague. Oh my gosh.
But it's true. These ships are tiny. They're tiny, Gigi.
Yeah.
And I always find that kind of thing fascinating when you see how historical things would play out, like physically on the ground. You see these big mansions from the 18th century in Colonial Williamsburg or something. I think you said you're down in Virginia, right?
Yeah, I'm very close to Williamsburg. Yeah.
So you look at those houses and you think, oh, this is grand living. Then you realize, wait a second, they're like 4 people in each room. Same thing as the ship, like everyone's crammed together. It's really a strange communal way of living. And we just try to kind of like, we try to see it as elegant but if you restore the historical reality to it, it really is very peculiar. Like,
yeah. And scary.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, can I just point out that I did make a drink because it's called Drinks in the Library. This is a
Thank
real gin and tonic, you know.
you. Cheers.
Mhm.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you. And okay, so there's a lot of elements to this story. We talked the historical past.
Yeah.
I know there is like a queer love story to it as well. I mean, are there any conversations that you want to spark or perspectives you would like to challenge with this?
Well, I mean, one thing is that it's my first book written entirely for adults. So
Hmm.
all of the book, like my most recent book, Elf Dog and Owlhead, was like a Newbery honor book, that kind of thing. So that I have these books. I'm known for writing for kids. So this is the first time that I've really dealt with a lot of adult material, and I don't just mean like sexy stuff. I also just mean like the peculiarities of history. I don't
Right.
talk much about in some cases. You know what I mean? Like, so I'm excited to be doing this for a new, it's a new audience. My previous work has been for both teens and adults, or sometimes even just for kids.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and you've done so well, and so I think we've got a new hit on our way
Oh, thank you.
with Nick. So that's wonderful. And now, all right, let's thank you so much. All right, we're gonna give Scott a chance.
Yeah, please. Yeah, yeah.
All right, so Scott, as I already mentioned, your book has a very different setting than MT's. Here's a quote from Booklist. Um, Guild's novel is cinematic, with tones of Black Mirror's ethical acuity and the quirkiness of everything everywhere all at once. There remains a tenderness that is at times whimsical in the figurines' demonstration of how trauma, grief, and disability are still entrenched in the human need for connection. So, going back to the same question I asked MT, who were you when you wrote this book and your motivation behind it?
So I started writing this book in 2013. So I was I was many versions of myself, I would say,
Yeah.
throughout the period of writing it. When I first started writing it, I had just recently left kind of a music career, doing that full time, and I was just starting to figure out and sort of like get my bearings writing like a novel seriously for the first time. And then I went to graduate school, and then I continued working on this project through 2 graduate programs, and then for some years afterwards. So in a way, I mean, you read the book and it is a continuous story of this character, Aaron, who is a plastic figurine. But when I read it, it's almost like a diary for me of the last decade, which for, like 2013 to 2023, when I finished it, was just an unthinkably turbulent, strange decade where our relationship to technology completely changed, our sense of the environment completely changed, our political order got completely upended. And as I was writing the book and as the world was getting stranger and stranger around me, and I felt the world of my childhood and when I was younger shifting and transforming, the book was becoming stranger and shifting too, in ways that I wasn't always predicting and controlling. It was kind of taking its own leaps and bounds. And sometimes I almost felt like I was trying to keep up with the book myself in some ways. So yeah, I think I was several different people during the writing of the book, and maybe I'm only sane because of the book. I could kind of the book kept me tethered to earth in some ways. So as I talk about this, I realize maybe I'm not even actually answering your question at the moment, but I think I was a very concerned person, I would say, as I saw Trump get elected and the coronavirus sweep in, and the book was shifting and transforming in conversation with all that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so with your going back to the very beginning too, with everything that led up to afterwards, I mean, what was your impetus, your motivation, you think, when you first got started? It's a very interesting story with the plastic figurines. It's a little
Mhm.
different.
Yeah, and when I first started writing it, the characters were not plastic figurines. It was almost as if I wanted the book to, in terms of its form and the way the story is told, the way it's written, capture something of what the world felt like to me at that time and in those moments. And when I started writing the book in 2013, it was more just a speculative fiction story set in the near future where the climate crisis had progressed a little bit and an eco-terrorist movement had risen up to address that. And then my main character kind of lived in the midst of that political turmoil and that ecological turmoil, right?
Mhm.
But for me, writing the book, the longer I stayed with it, it wasn't capturing really the essence or the emotion of what it felt like to be alive in those times. Almost like if you think about it in music, if you have a song where a guitar is playing, but then underneath it you put in some like very like staccato strings or something that creates this anxious feeling to everything, you know.
Hmm.
Book needed something like that. It needed to transform in some way to really
Right.
convey what it was like to be alive then. So I think out of that came the decision, let's make them plastic figurines, or
Hmm.
let's have it be a musical where the characters are bursting into song and spotlights are shining down out of nowhere. And I have to say though, it wasn't like I was sitting there thinking like, maybe there'll be plastic figurines. These ideas would come to me, and initially they would seem so extreme that I'd be like, I couldn't possibly do that. The whole book is going to fall apart. But I'd be
Uh-huh.
stuck, so I try it anyway, and then it would be a lot. It would be a lot of fun. But I mean, the characters didn't become plastic figurines until about 2018. You know what I mean? So it was like
Hmm.
halfway through the Trump administration. I think I was like, it's figurine time. You know?
That I like that. That's a good one. Um, so going back to the story, so Aaron is the main character.
Yes.
What would you say is what's the book about?
Well, I usually, when I describe the book to people, I usually start with the fact that it's this near future world of plastic figurines. If you start telling people the story and then say, oh, by the way, they're all dolls with hollow bodies, it gets a little disorienting. So, and by the way, it's a musical too. So I normally start out with some of the bigger formal stuff just to, ground people in that.
Right.
But then, yeah, Erin, I mean, she's a lonely woman in her 20s. She's dealing with a lot of grief and trauma. And in many ways, the book is, it's a love story about someone who meets someone else in the midst of this very disordered world. And she has a lot of secrets and a lot of things in her past that she hasn't quite processed or understood how to recover from. So, in many ways, I was on the one hand reading a lot of, Kafka and formerly strange stuff, but then I was also reading a lot of Alice Munro and Marilyn Robinson when I was reading it, and trying to have that world of literary fiction where the story is entirely about a person's spiritual and emotional transformation, have it really be grounded in that, but then also be in this world where the form was speaking to the strangeness of what life is like right now, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. And so you've brought up a little bit of the musical components. So let's talk a little bit about the structure of the book.
Oh, sure.
As a musician, you have also written music to accompany the story, right?
Right. Yes, 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 yes.
So, I mean, that's very unique. So I would love to hear a little bit more about it.
Yeah, so that was, like I was talking about how the book kept developing in new ways that I was following. At a certain point, it was after the book sold to Pantheon and I was working with my editor. I was working on a scene, and one of the characters, Morris, if you're familiar with,
Mm.
the
Yeah.
the singing, dancing crucifix. If people who haven't read the book are like, what on earth is there is a singing, dancing crucifix in the book.
Mhm.
Morris burst into song while I was working on an edit, and I had this thought of, oh, what if this is a musical and the characters are singing? So I brought this to my editor, thinking like this will probably be politely dismissed, but instead my editor was very receptive and excited about the idea. So I was like, okay. So I put all these musical numbers into the book, and then there were too many, and we had to trim some out. So the book was then kind of like a musical in novel form, and at
Mhm.
that point, I kind of realized that my subconscious was telling me, like, you want to make an album right now, don't you? You just turned your book into a pop album. So I was like, okay. So I connected with a friend of mine named Cinder Talk, who's one of the best musicians I've ever met. And he was excited about the project. And then there's a singer, she performs as Stranger Cat, but her name is Kat Martino, who's this incredible singer. So she almost took on Aaron as a character, and she sings across the album, performing as Aaron in all these songs. So if you listen to the album after reading the book, it's kind of like you get to go back through the story in song form. The album is chronological, so it's like the first song is kind of like has lines from page one, and the last song is that final scene in the graveyard. So you sort of go through the story in music form. Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. I like Boy Toy a lot. I was listening to it earlier
Oh, thank you.
today.
I'm so glad. Yeah.
Um, so and also what do you hope your readers take away from this story? Are there any conversations you want to spark with your novel?
Well, I think in some ways, I love for the, it's, I don't think I'm writing fiction where it's like a, like a George Orwell, like call to action type of book. I mean, it is about a character trying to process this moment. But yeah, I think the novel does take on the ecological crisis we're in a pretty straightforward way. And that's one of my big concerns just as a human being alive in this moment. So while I don't think the book is like didactically like teaching the reader to believe certain things, I think it's more open-ended in terms of how you're experiencing the characters and the world. It would be great if that was positioning people towards those conversations and thinking about those things. And then I think ultimately for my character, Aaron, even though it's kind of a zany experimental novel, I mean, a lot of the arc of the book is about her going through like kind of a spiritual transformation too. And the answer for her in the midst of her whole world collapsing really are ultimately kind of spiritual answers and spiritual growth. So I think that conversation too is so important and kind of gets lost in the shuffle sometimes these days while we, stare at our phones and slowly perish inside. So,
oh yeah,
your questions, yeah.
that was great. So thank you so much. All right, so I want to talk about Library Week, National Library Week. So if we can, MT, what roles do libraries play in your life, in your writing life? Let's start with that. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I just want to say, Scott, I love everything you had to say. In particular, I love the idea that I think that when books appear, people think of them as this sort of like object, like the monolith that lands in, 2001, like, and there it is and it's whole and complete. But like for us, it is this whole process of discovery. And I loved what you said about like finding experimentalism as a result of what was going on around you. I just think that's really important for people, for readers to know, like these things are molten when we're working with them and they change a lot. And that, to go to Gigi's question, that actually answers to some extent, like, for me, I end up doing so much intense library research and asking the local university library to find me. I mean, because this book that I just did was historical fiction. So like, finding all of these like Turkish archaeological articles about the place that St. Nicholas's corpse was stolen from, because we have fragments of his sarcophagus and things, so we can actually look at all this and see how there was a little factory that produced the ooze that then supposedly was coming off of his body, that kind of thing. So wow. I had a lot of help from librarians all the time getting super obscure stuff. And they were always like excited about it, which always, like I was confused, like I'm making your life miserable. But no, they were like, no, this is what we live for. This is the quest. So, but I think that like that thing, I mean, in a sense, it does connect with what Scott is talking about, in the sense that as we work on these projects, we need input. We need material that comes in, for us to kind of process what it is we're trying to make. And libraries are just, I mean, obviously their role nationally is hugely important for a democracy. But I mean, individually speaking, as a writer, I would say that it's because you need that input from strange and surprising and sources all the time.
Yeah, and I will say, as a librarian who's been in the field, 13 years now, it's our greatest joy is when we have the time and someone gives us a really in-depth reference question like what you're talking about that we can really dive into. So thank you for librarians around the world. All right. And then I guess, Scott, let's turn it over to you. Same question. I mean, what kind of roles do libraries play in your life, in your writing life?
Yeah, so I have three thoughts that I think I'm hoping they thread together in a linear, clear way. Let's see how this goes. But just going back to something Anteve was saying, which was so interesting earlier about writing something that's set in the future, kind of like dystopian fiction or speculative fiction, and then writing historical fiction. I think there's so much connection in the level of detail of world building you're doing. So for me, before I wrote Plastic, I was actually on a break from it for about 2 years when I got completely stuck before they were plastic figurines. I switched over and I was working on a historical fiction piece set in like the 18th century. It was like, and when you were saying the ooze, it was all set in Philadelphia during the yellow fever of 1793. So I was like, Yeah, it's like that's a, ooze was a big part of my life for a couple of years there. So it's like, I don't want people to think all historical fiction you just go straight to the ooze, but I was very much I was very much there. But anyway, during that time I was constantly at the library at the University of Nebraska Lincoln, just picking up reference materials and finding all sorts of books. And it was so hugely important to my life as a writer. And I don't think until that moment I'd understood how deep you could go into world building as historical sources let you do and falling into it. So then when I paused that project and went back to my speculative fiction novel, I honestly think it had been all that library time and library research that let me go and write speculative fiction with a level of specificity and detail that I hadn't had before. So I'm very excited now that Plastic is done. My next book is historical fiction, and I'm going back into like the late 1940s, early 1950s, and kind of like a revisionist mode. So I have all these books on the early communist movement, and my characters are these sort of like failed, angry New York City communists. So I'm going back into that mode, and I can't wait to get into all the library stuff. With the university libraries too, they let you take out books for like 3-4 months. So I had these, like, people would have thought that I was like going full Stalin or something for a minute, because I just had stacks and stacks of like communist reference materials. They'd walk into the house, but I'd explain it was for fiction and that I wasn't, making some dark retrograde, ideological shift in my life,
Be careful. Don't get on a list anywhere.
I gotta be careful. Yeah.
And so why have you unmuted? So in going back to that, any experiences or concerns about censorship or the culture of reading right now?
Oh, is it for me?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm horrified and terrified. And this is something MT has actually experienced, right? With some of his books, which is, I just think, a terrifying thing to even contemplate. I feel like my book is yeah, I mean, I can't conceive of spending all that time creating something and then putting it out into the world and then having people have some weird persnickety thing, and they probably don't even have a problem with the book and haven't even read the book. They don't have a good political platform themselves, and so they're just trying to score points by attacking people, so it's a tremendously frustrating time to live in, yeah, with all that going on. And libraries play such a huge role in combating that, not just in what they represent, but also in just like training people up in literacy so they're a little bit more intelligent and can think through these things. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And then MT, I mean, as Scott just said, you have a experience with being banned. So
Yeah,
what's that like?
This is Scott. You'll love the story. So Feed, which I wrote now, like what, 22, 23 years ago, it has been one of the 100 most banned books in the US, but not for any good reason, because in fact, like, it is a critique of like online culture that probably most of the banners would agree with in many ways. But here's the wild thing, and Scott, you as a dystopian fiction writer, I think will enjoy this. It was actually banned in Iowa by AI. So this summer, I'm not kidding, it's a critique of AI that was banned by AI. So it was this summer, in Iowa, they passed this law that no book that contains sexual situations or depicts sexual situations could actually be included in a school library. But of course, they have these collections of like hundreds of thousands of books. How are they going to do this? So they ran their full collections through ChatGPT and said, which are the ones that depict sexual situations? And it was terrifying, because 19 books were chosen to be torn out of this one city in Iowa. And I have to say, like, I mean, in mine, to be fair, all of the sex in that book is bad sex anyway. And it's more importantly was almost every book on there, it was not like titillating or anything else. These were all books about sexual trauma. And not just that, these were kind of the great American classics, like The Color Purple, like Beloved by Toni Morrison, which is surely one of the great American novels of all time. Like, and then Theodore Dreiser's An American Tragedy, long known as a hot read, So the thing is that all of these are books that actually deal with the troublesome side of sexuality, which in a sense is exactly what teens would need to read about, in a sense, like the teens who are really hurting. And this extends a rule of silence over them that some of them are already experiencing in terrifying situations at home or whatever else. So it was really, really kind of awful. And that specifically that it did seem to also include race in it, whether that was, I mean, it wasn't supposedly in the question they asked, but most of the books were by African-American writers, and most of them were specifically about trauma. So anyway, like there are all sorts of reasons that's a terrifying example. I suspect it won't be repeated for a few years until algorithms are a little more sophisticated. But as of now, to my knowledge, I'm still banned in that city. So, so there you go.
Well, we're all on you. We're all with you. Yeah, sorry, Scott.
Oh, sorry. No, I had a dumb joke question. Never mind.
Are you sure?
I was asking him if he felt dangerous. I mean, it's not really essential to our conversation.
I only wish I felt dangerous.
Like a James Dean, like edgy feel, you're banned in a whole city. I mean, it's pretty cool. I mean,
oh no, I know. I want to just go to the edge of the city and stick my foot inside, like a little brother saying like, "Oh, I'm on your side of the room."
I would buy a leather jacket, even as a
okay. You don't think the bourgeois hoodie is doing it?
I love the hoodie, but I just think you've earned it with your edgy.
Yeah. But this is super serious. Like I have a bunch of because I move in children's literature circles in particular, there's a lot of banning going on that is not being reported on, and it's really bad. And it's not just about like sexual situations, which is what gets attention. A lot of it really is about what are the facts of history in this country. A lot of that kind of thing is honestly being banned. What are the literal facts that are agreed upon already? So reality is, in a sense, being chewed away at this by this.
Yeah. Well, this is like such an amazing conversation. Both of y'all have wonderful viewpoints. I do want to ask, let's see, who's not muted? Scott, you're not muted. What are you working on now, and where can people find you?
What am I working on now, and where can people? Oh, it just came down there. That's where they should go. The link.
There you go.
There we go. Our wonderful producer, John. There. Thank you, John. Yeah. So that website has more information probably than you would want, but it's all there waiting for you. And I'm working on a new book right now, but given the 10-year gestation period of my last book, I would not be setting your setting your clocks by. But I'm having a very good time working on a new project, so everyone can know that I'm enjoying myself. But I also tend to hide with my projects for a very long time too. So like my wife and I always tell this story that it wasn't until like a couple months before our actual wedding that she got to read my book that I'd been working on for so long. I wasn't sharing it, so there was this moment about 4 months before our wedding ceremony when I arrived and gave her my book. And I just think, I don't think she would have like walked out of the relationship, but I just think like it was good she liked it. It was like that went well. So like scottguild.com, and then be grateful my marriage worked out, I guess, is to sum up that point. Yeah.
We're all here for that. All right. And MT, same question. What are you working on now? And then where can people find you?
Well, what I'm working on now is the nonfiction version of the same story, that the novel Nicked, which is coming out this summer, will be the fictional version. I'm working on the nonfiction version. But I do also just want to say, like, doesn't everyone find mannequins kind of attractive, like plastic people? They really are kind of more attractive than actual humans. Like, I don't know why there aren't more mannequin fetishists.
I just want to say that I'm not a mannequin fetishist. I just want to put that out there into the ether. Yeah.
They always look so breezy. Life seems very easy for them as they stand around the store. They're very slim.
Yeah.
I spent so long working on those plastic people in that book too, that when I go out into the world and I'd see people with flesh and blood, sometimes I'd be a little like surprised. Be like, what? Aren't you? Anyway, but yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, this has been. Oh, sorry, Scott.
Oh no, I was just saying, yes, of course they're very attractive. Sorry, I keep interrupting.
They are. Well, I want to say we're a little over time, but so it was so nice to meet both of y'all tonight, and thank you to everyone for coming. I hope you all check out Scott and MT's new books. And if you're interested in checking out my podcast, Drinks in the Library, you can find it on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube podcasts. Episodes drop on Tuesday. Please stay in touch with EveryLibrary here on social and sign up for their newsletter at everylibrary.org. Good night, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.